The wind came sweeping down from the mountains, carrying the dry scent of mesquite and dust, and the faint cry of a hawk circling somewhere high above. The desert stretched in all directions, endless and untamed, painted in gold and amber under the sinking sun. In that silence broken only by the whisper of the wind and the rustle of distant horses, a young woman rode alone across the wild land. Her hair was tangled from the day's heat, her dress torn at the hem, and her eyes burned with something stronger than fear-defiance. She had left everything behind when she crossed the river. That morning, the soldiers, the mission, and the orders that bound her. It wasn't bravery that pushed her forward, but a voice deep inside that told her she couldn't turn back. They had warned her that the Apache lands were forbidden, that no white woman who rode that far west would ever return. But warnings meant little to her now. She had made a promise to find the missing children taken after the raid on the settlement. No one else had dared to follow, so she went alone, armed with nothing but a small rifle and a heart full of stubborn courage. The trail was rough, cut through canyons that swallowed sound, through sand that glowed like fire under the sun. By midday, her horse was stumbling, and her lips were cracked from thirst. Yet she pressed on, guided by tracks that only half showed in the dust. When she finally stopped at a shallow creek, her reflection in the water startled her. She barely recognized the woman staring back, sunburned, weary, yet unbroken. The land had a way of testing those who entered it, stripping away everything false until only truth remained. As she filled her flask, a sudden stillness fell. The birds had gone silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. She felt it then, that prickling at the back of her neck, the instinct that tells you when you're being watched. Slowly, she lifted her head, her eyes sweeping the ridges above. Nothing moved, yet she knew she wasn't alone. The Apache were said to move like shadows unseen until they chose to be. She reached for her rifle, her hands trembling just enough to betray her. A horse snorted softly behind her, close to close. She turned, but it was already too late. A man sat astride a painted stallion, tall and motionless, watching her with eyes that seemed to catch the light in a strange, unsettling way. His face was painted with the markings of his people, his hair bound in leather, his expression calm yet unreadable. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them felt heavy with something unspoken, fear, curiosity, and a strange respect. She lifted her chin, trying to hide her trembling. "I mean no harm," she said quietly. "I'm only passing through." He didn't answer. His gaze swept over her torn dress, the dust clinging to her skin, the rifle clutched tight in her hands. Then his voice came low and measured, carrying the calm authority of someone who is used to being obeyed. "No one passes through this land without the chief's word." The way he said it left no doubt he was the chief. She swallowed hard, fighting the urge to back away. "I'm not here to fight," she said, forcing the words past her dry throat. "Children were taken during the raid 2 nights ago. I came to find them." His eyes narrowed slightly, though his face didn't change. "And you thought you could cross into Apache land alone?" "I had no choice," she replied. "The soldiers were too afraid. Someone had to try." He dismounted slowly, his movements controlled and deliberate. The ground barely stirred beneath his boots as he stepped closer. She could feel the power in his presence, the quiet strength of a man who commanded without needing to raise his voice. When he stopped a few feet away, she realized just how tall he was, how steady his gaze remained on her. "You've crossed into sacred land," he said, his tone quieter now, but no less firm. "Even men with guns don't ride this far without reason. You will come with me." Her heart pounded hard in her chest. "I can't. Not until I find the children." His brow lifted slightly, as if she'd just spoken a challenge. "You defy the chief's command?" Something flickered in her eyes, then a mix of fear and pride. "If that's what it means to do what's right, then yes." For a heartbeat, there was only silence between them. The kind of silence that stretches and deepens, where words lose their meaning and something else begins to speak a language of glances, of understanding neither sought but couldn't ignore. He studied her like a man trying to solve a riddle the world had never told before. There was something about her spirit, her refusal to bow, that stirred a quiet fire in him. He was not a man as Ali moved, yet something in her voice carried truth. "Your courage will cost you," he said finally, his tone unreadable. "Then I'll pay it," she replied. His eyes met hers again, and for a fleeting second, the hardness in them softened. It was only a flicker, but it was enough. The world around them, the wind, the sun, the endless desert seemed to fade. It was as if everything had gone still to listen to the silent battle between their wills. Without another word, he turned and signaled for her to follow. A small group of riders emerged from the shadows of the rocks, silent as ghosts. She hadn't even seen them there. Her pulse quickened, but she didn't resist as they led her deeper into the canyon, toward a land few outsiders had ever seen. By nightfall, they reached a hidden valley lit by the glow of small fires. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and cedar. Women moved quietly between the tents, and children's laughter drifted faintly through the air. It was not the savage camp the stories had described. It was a place of rhythm and life. The chief dismounted and turned to her. "You will stay here until I decide what to do with you." She met his gaze again, steady and unflinching. "And if I refuse?" He stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "You already have." Something passed between them, then a tension that was not quite hostility, not quite understanding. Her defiance intrigued him, even as it challenged everything he stood for. She was an outsider, a trespasser, yet her courage echoed something he had long buried beneath the weight of duty. As the firelight danced across his face, she wondered what kind of man he truly was beneath the title of chief. And he, though he would never admit it aloud, wondered why her presence felt like both danger and destiny. That night, as she sat by the fire with her hands bound, she could feel his eyes on her from across the camp. There was no cruelty in his gaze, only a strange, quiet power that unsettled her more than any weapon. She didn't know what fate awaited her, or whether the children she sought were still alive. But deep down, she sensed that her path and his were now entwined in a way neither could undo. The wind rose again, carrying the faint sound of drums from the far side of the camp. Shadows moved like ghosts among the fires. Somewhere in the darkness, the chief's voice murmured something to his men in a language she didn't understand, and they nodded solemnly. Then his gaze turned toward her once more, steady, unyielding, and filled with something she could not name. It was in that moment, beneath the vast desert sky, that she realized her heart had begun to tremble not from fear, but from something far more dangerous. And though she had defied his orders, though she had crossed his land uninvited, she knew with a clarity that frightened her more than the thought of death, his gaze had already chained her heart forever. The night grew colder as the fires burned low, and the desert sky stretched wide above her, heavy with stars. She could hear the distant howl of a coyote and the soft rhythm of drums that rose and fell like a heartbeat. The sound was strange and haunting, carrying something ancient that reached deep into her chest. She sat near the edge of the camp, her hands still tied, her back against a wooden post. The air smelled of smoke, leather, and wild sage. Around her, the Apache moved quietly, their faces calm, their voices low. It was as if they lived in rhythm with the land itself. The chief had not spoken to her again since bringing her to the camp. He had given an order, and his people obeyed without question. 2 women had brought her a blanket and a bowl of stew made from corn and beans. But they said nothing, only nodded politely, before leaving her alone. She tried to eat, but her stomach was tight with fear and confusion. Every sound in the darkness made her lift her head, half expecting something to happen, yet nothing did. The silence, broken only by the crackle of fire, seemed almost watchful. Her mind drifted back to the night of the raid, the smoke and screams, the burning roofs, the flashes of gunfire against the sky. She could still hear the desperate cries of the children as they were taken. When the flames died and the dust settled, all that remained was the echo of loss. The soldiers at the fort had called it revenge for broken promises, for land taken and treaties betrayed. But she had seen more than anger in the eyes of the Apache that night. She had seen pain. Before dawn, the sound of soft footsteps pulled her from restless sleep. The chief stood nearby, his figure outlined against the fading firelight. He looked down at her, silent for a long moment before speaking. You did not try to run. She met his gaze steadily. Where would I go? Your men would find me before I took 10 steps. His expression didn't change. You are wise enough to know that. I'm only trying to find the children, she said quietly. If you let me, I'll go back once I know they're safe. He looked at her for a long time, his eyes searching her face. You believe I would harm them? I don't know what to believe, she admitted. I only know what I've been told. He turned away then, his jaw tight. What you have been told comes from those who broke every promise they ever made to my people. His words cut through the silence like the edge of a knife. She wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped her. There was no anger in his voice, only truth, the kind that came from years of loss. He walked a few paces toward the fire and crouched beside it, stirring the embers with a stick. The orange light flickered across his face, revealing lines of weariness she hadn't noticed before. My father was chief before me, he said slowly. He believed peace was possible. He trusted the words of white men. He signed papers he could not read, believing they would honor their promise to leave us our land. But they did not. When he died, they took the valley and the water. They left my people to starve. She listened, her throat tightening. So you fight to take it back. You fight to survive, he said simply. His eyes lifted to hers again, steady and sharp. And now you walk into our land, carrying the same name as those who took from us. You ask for trust. Tell me why I should give it. For a moment she couldn't speak. The truth was tangled inside her, part duty, part guilt, part something she couldn't yet name. Because I'm not them, she said softly. Because I don't want to see any more children die, yours or ours. Something flickered in his eyes again, a quiet shift like wind stirring dry leaves. He stood and walked away without another word, leaving her to the silence and the slow brightening of dawn. By morning, the camp began to stir. Men prepared horses, women gathered wood, and the children laughed and chased each other between the tents. She watched it all, amazed at how normal it seemed, how human. It wasn't the picture of savagery painted by those back at the fort. There was order here, kindness even. One of the women who had brought her food the night before approached again, this time offering her a drink of water. When she hesitated, the woman smiled faintly and spoke in halting English. You safe here. No harm. Her voice was gentle, and something in it eased the tightness in the young woman's chest. Thank you, she whispered. The day passed slowly. The chief was gone for most of it, riding out with several warriors toward the canyon. She watched them leave, a cloud of dust trailing behind their horses, and wondered where they were going. The camp felt quieter without him, though she didn't understand why his absence should matter to her at all. She had told herself he was her captor, her enemy. Yet when she thought of his eyes, the calm strength in them, her heart stirred in a way that unsettled her. By late afternoon, shadows stretched long across the valley. She sat near the creek, her hands free now, but still watched from a distance by one of the guards. The air was cooler here, the water bright as glass. She thought of the river she'd crossed to get here, of the people waiting or perhaps giving her up for dead. Somewhere beyond the horizon was everything she'd known, but it already felt like a different world. When the chief returned, the sun was sinking behind the cliffs. Dust clung to his clothes and his expression was unreadable. The others greeted him quietly with the respect of those who depended on his word. He spoke briefly with the elders, then walked toward her. You will come, he said simply. She rose, unsure what he meant, but followed anyway. He led her across the camp to a tent near the edge of the valley. Inside, the air was cool and dim. Two children sat by a small fire, their eyes wide with curiosity. Her heart stopped when she recognized them, the same faces she had seen crying during the raid. They are alive, the chief said. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Thank God, she whispered. You didn't harm them. They were never meant to be harmed, he said quietly. They are being taught our ways. When they are ready, they will be free to choose where they belong. She looked at him, confused. You mean, you'll let them go? He didn't answer. His silence was heavy with something more complicated than refusal. You see only one side, he said finally. They have been told our people are evil. But if they leave knowing truth, Maybe one day peace will be more than a word. She studied his face, trying to understand. And you risk war for that? He looked at her, the faintest trace of a smile in his eyes. War was brought to us long ago. We only learned to survive it. That night, she couldn't sleep. The images played in her mind, the children's faces, the pain in his voice, the memories of smoke and fire. Nothing was simple anymore. The world she had known felt smaller, her certainty fading with every heartbeat. She could no longer tell who was right and who was wrong, only that both sides carried scars that would never fully heal. Outside, the drums began again, slow and steady. She stepped from her tent and saw the fire burning bright at the center of camp. The people were gathered in a circle, singing in low, rhythmic tones. The chief stood among them, tall and still, the flames painting gold across his skin. His eyes found hers through the distance. And for a moment, everything else disappeared. Something inside her shifted, then something she didn't yet understand. She had come searching for children, for answers, for justice. But what she found was a truth deeper than all of it, that this land held both pain and beauty, and that even among enemies, hearts could recognize each other. Yet even as she felt the pull of that strange connection, she knew danger still hung over them. The soldiers would not rest. They would come searching soon, and when they did, there would be blood. She looked toward the horizon, where darkness swallowed the hills, and a quiet dread crept through her chest. She turned back toward the fire, where the chief still stood, his face calm but his eyes shadowed. He had the look of a man who carried too many burdens and trusted too few. And in that moment, she understood that, whatever was coming, their fates were already tied together, bound not by choice, but by the relentless will of the land itself. The drums grew louder, echoing against the cliffs like thunder. Sparks rose into the air, carried away by the wind. The night was alive with the pulse of something ancient, something that would not be silenced. And as she stood there, caught between fear and fascination, she knew that her journey into Apache land had only just begun. The days that followed passed in a blur of heat and silence. Each morning, she woke to the sound of horses and the smell of smoke rising from the campfires. Life in the valley had a rhythm of its own. Men rode out at dawn to hunt or scout the edges of the land, while women tended fires, wove baskets, and taught the children. The air carried a steady hum of work and quiet conversation. Yet beneath it all, she could sense something restless, like a storm gathering beyond the horizon. The Apache lived with constant caution, her eyes always scanning the ridges as if expecting danger to come at any moment. She had begun to move more freely around the camp. The chief had ordered her untied days ago, though one of his men always kept her within sight. Still, she was no longer treated like a prisoner. Some of the women spoke to her now, curious about where she came from. She tried to explain in simple words, though her halting attempts often made them laugh. For the first time since arriving, she caught herself smiling. Yet the chief remained a mystery. He was often gone, riding out before sunrise, and returning only when the shadows stretched long. When he did speak to her, his words were brief, but they carried weight. She had begun to notice how the others looked at him with both fear and love, as if he were not just a leader, but the keeper of their hope. One afternoon, she found herself near the edge of the camp, helping one of the women grind corn. The rhythm of the stone was steady and calming. The woman's name was Tala, and she had a kind face lined with years of desert wind. "He watches you," Tala said quietly, not looking up. She froze. "Who? The chief?" Tala said. "His eyes follow you even when you don't see." Her cheeks warmed, though she didn't know why. "I don't think that's true." Tala smiled faintly. "You came from the enemy's world. But he says your heart is different. I think he is not sure if you are a danger or a gift." The words caught her off guard. "Why would he say that?" "Because he sees things the rest of us don't," Tala said softly. "He was born with a spirit that listens to the land. But even he cannot control what it shows him." That night, she thought about those words long after the camp fell silent. She lay awake, watching the shadows move against the tent walls. The chief's presence lingered in her thoughts, heavy as the heat of the day. There was something between them that neither spoke of. something that frightened her more than captivity itself. The next morning, everything changed. A scout returned to camp at dawn, his horse covered in dust. He went straight to the chief, speaking fast and low. Whatever he said made the chief's expression darken. Soon after, the camp stirred with urgency. Warriors began to arm themselves, tying rifles across their saddles and checking arrows. The women gathered children close, whispering prayers in hushed tones. She watched, her heart pounding. When the chief passed near her tent, she called out, "What's happening?" He stopped, turning toward her. "Soldiers," he said. "They've crossed the ridge," her breath caught. "They're coming here?" "Not yet," he said. "But they are close." "Then you have to leave," she said quickly. "If they find you here, there'll be another fight." He looked at her, calm and steady. "We don't run from what's ours." "This isn't about pride," she insisted. "They'll kill you all." His gaze didn't waver. "They will try, but we know this land better than they ever will," she wanted to argue, to tell him that she had seen what the soldiers could do, but something in his voice silenced her. There was no arrogance there, only certainty. He had spent his life fighting for this place. It wasn't just land to him, it was identity, memory, blood. The warriors rode out soon after, vanishing into the canyons like shadows. The camp grew tense and quiet. She stayed near the creek with Tala and the children, listening to the distant echo of hoofbeats. The air felt thick, as if holding its breath. Hours passed before the riders returned. Dust clung to their clothes and their faces were grim. The chief dismounted first, his expression unreadable. When he saw her waiting near the water, he hesitated before walking over. "They found a patrol," he said. 5 soldiers. "They were looking for you." Her blood ran cold. "For me. They had your name written on a paper," he said, "and orders to bring you back to the fort." She felt dizzy. "Then they think I'm dead." He nodded. "Until now?" She turned away, her hands trembling. "If they know I'm alive, they'll come here. They won't stop until they find me." "Then you've brought danger with you," one of the men muttered behind her. The words stung because they were true. The chief silenced him with a glance. "Enough." He looked back at her, his voice lower now. "You said you came to find the children? You've seen them safe. You could go back and tell them that. End this." She met his eyes, torn between fear and conviction. "If I go, they'll still come. They'll destroy everything here just to prove they can. I've seen it happen before." He studied her as if weighing something deep inside. "Then what do you suggest?" She hesitated. "Let me talk to them. If they see me alive, maybe they'll leave. They think the Apache took me captive. If I tell them I came willingly, it might stop a war. You think your words can stop soldiers?" He asked. "No," she said quietly. "But maybe it can stop them from killing people who don't deserve to die." He didn't answer. For a long moment, they just stared at each other, the tension between them thick as the desert air. Finally, he turned away. "We'll speak of it tomorrow. Tonight, we prepare." As the sun set, the camp moved like a living thing. Fires burned low, horses were tied close, and every sound seemed sharper. She could feel the unease in the air, a current of fear that threaded through the people. She wanted to help, to do something, but all she could do was wait. Later that night, she found herself walking toward the edge of camp where the chief stood alone, staring at the horizon. The firelight cast a warm glow across his face, softening the hard lines carved there by years of struggle. "You should rest," she said quietly. He didn't look at her. "Sleep does not come easily when the wind carries danger." "Will you fight them?" she asked. "If they come for us, yes. And if they come for me?" This time he turned, his gaze steady. "Then I will decide what must be done." There was no threat in his tone, but the weight of his words sent a chill through her. "You don't trust me?" she said. "I trust what I see," he replied. "And I see someone caught between 2 worlds." "I didn't ask to be," she whispered. "No one ever does," he said. The silence stretched, filled with the distant cry of an owl and the soft crackle of fire. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his expression told her enough. He was a man divided, two between peace and war, mercy and duty. As the night deepened, thunder rolled faintly in the distance. The desert rarely saw rain, yet the air felt heavy with the promise of a storm. She looked toward the horizon, where flashes of light flickered far off among the cliffs. The chief's voice broke the quiet. "When the soldiers come, they will not come to talk. They will come to take, and if you are still here, you will stand in the middle of what they mean to destroy." "Then tell me what to do," she said. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Stay close to the children. Whatever happens, do not run toward the guns." She nodded, though fear gripped her. He turned away again, his silhouette outlined against the burning sky. That night, she barely slept. In the early hours before dawn, she heard the first distant echo of horses. The sound was faint, but unmistakable. The soldiers were coming. The camp stirred in silence, the people moving like shadows. She stood near the creek, clutching the edge of a blanket, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. The chief mounted his horse, his men behind him, their faces set with quiet resolve. He looked toward her once more, and in that brief glance, she saw everything he would never say: his fear for his people, his anger at a world that refused peace, and something else that burned quietly beneath it all. When the riders disappeared into the canyon, she stood frozen, her breath caught between hope and dread. The storm clouds above had gathered thick and dark, and the first low rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. The desert held its breath, waiting for the first shot that would decide everything. The morning came without light. Clouds hung low over the desert, heavy and gray, pressing down on the land as if the sky itself had grown tired. The valley that had once glowed gold under the sun now looked shadowed and cold. The fires burned low, giving off only thin threads of smoke that drifted through the still air. No one spoke. The women moved quietly, gathering the children close, and the men stood ready near their horses. Every face held the same look, waiting for something they all knew was coming. She stood near the edge of camp, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. From the distance came a dull, rhythmic sound, the echo of horses. The soldiers were drawing closer. She could almost feel the vibration through the ground. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to stay calm. Tala came to her side, eyes full of worry. "When the time comes," she whispered, "you stay with me. Promise." She nodded, though her throat was too tight to answer. Her gaze searched the camp for the chief. He stood at the far end, surrounded by his warriors, giving orders in low tones. His voice carried calm authority, though she could see the strain in his eyes. When he turned, their gazes met across the distance. He didn't speak, but the look was enough, told her to stay strong. The first gunshot split the silence like a crack of lightning. The echo bounced off the cliffs, followed by a scream. The children began to cry. The chief's men rushed into position, spreading across the ridge where the canyon narrowed. Dust rose in the distance where the soldiers approached in a long line, their horses dark shapes against the horizon. She felt her stomach twist. There were more of them than she had imagined, dozens. Maybe more. The chief mounted his horse, his movements smooth and deliberate. "Keep the women and children back," he called out. "We defend from the ridge." She ran to him before she could stop herself. "You can't fight them head on," she said. "They have rifles, cannon, everything." He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "We have the land, and we have no choice. You'll be killed," she whispered. His eyes softened, just slightly. "If I fall, the land will remember." She wanted to say more, but his horse shifted beneath him, and he turned away. The riders galloped toward the ridge, dust swirling around them. She stood frozen, the world narrowing to the sound of hoofbeats and the taste of fear in her mouth. Tala pulled her back toward the shelter of the rocks, where the women had gathered with the children. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and dust. The battle began in a storm of noise. Gunfire cracked across the valley, sharp and endless. Smoke rose in thick clouds, blurring the line between earth and sky. She crouched low behind the rocks, holding a crying child against her chest. Every shot made her flinch. She could see flashes of movement along the ridgemen, running, ducking, firing. The sound of horses screaming tore through the air. Through the chaos, she caught sight of the chief. He was at the front, calm amid the madness, his commands cutting through the noise. He moved with the grace of someone who had lived his whole life on horseback, his rifle steady, his voice never shaking. But there were too many soldiers, their lines spreading wide, closing in from both sides. Her heart raced faster with every moment. She wanted to run to him, to do something, anything. But Tala's hand held her tight. "You stay," she said firmly. If he wanted you out there, he would have said so. Still, she couldn't look away. The world had turned to dust and thunder. Then a sudden blast shook the ground a cannon. The explosion tore through the ridge, sending rocks flying. One of the horses reared, throwing its rider. The sound made her cry out before she could stop herself. Tala pulled her lower, shielding the children. When the smoke cleared for a heartbeat, she saw him again, still standing, though his shoulder was bleeding. He didn't fall. He turned, shouting orders, rallying his men. The sight of his strength filled her with both pride and terror. As the sun rose higher, the battle only grew fiercer. The soldiers were advancing fast, using the cliffs for cover. The chief's men were fighting back, but they were outnumbered. She could see it in the way they moved, in the desperation in their faces. Every shot brought the enemy closer. The women began to whisper prayers. Some clutched charms made of bone and feathers. The air smelled of blood and dust, and the cries of the wounded echoed through the canyon. She felt helpless. Her hands trembled so hard she could barely hold the child anymore. Then, from somewhere behind the ridge, came another sound, the faint, high whistle of wind, moving fast through narrow stone. The canyon was alive with echoes. She realized the soldiers were circling. If they reached the valley from the far side, there would be nowhere left to run. She stood suddenly, her pulse pounding. "They're moving around," she said. "They'll come through the South Pass." Dala looked up sharply. "You can't go there, I have to warn him." Before Tala could stop her, she was running, her feet slipping in the dust. She stayed low, weaving between rocks, the gunfire growing louder with every step. Smoke stung her eyes, but she kept going. She could see the ridge now, where the chief and his men fought desperately to hold the line. When she reached him, one of his men shouted in surprise, but she ignored it. "They're coming from the south," she gasped. "You have to move." He turned to her, sweat and dust streaking his face. "How do you know?" "I heard it. They're trying to trap you." "What?" He looked toward the cliffs, his expression darkening. "Go back," he said. "This is no place for you." "Not leaving," she said, her voice shaking. "Not while you're still here." For a heartbeat, something flickered in his eyes, something raw and unguarded. But he didn't argue. He raised his rifle again, signaling to his men. "Half of you, to the South Pass," he ordered. "Now?" The men moved fast, riding hard across the valley. She stayed near the rocks, close enough to see everything, too afraid to run. Bullets struck the ground near her, sending up bursts of dirt. She ducked low, heart hammering. Then came another explosion, louder than before. The ground shook under her feet. A plume of smoke rose from the canyon floor. The soldiers were firing from above now, raining bullets down on the ridge. She saw the chief's horse fall, hit by a shot. He leaped free, rolling to the ground and grabbing his rifle. For a moment, he disappeared in the smoke. Her breath caught in her chest. When he emerged again, his expression was grim, his movements slower. Blood darkened his sleeve. She wanted to scream, to run to him, but the battle swallowed every sound. The wind carried dust so thick she could barely see. The world had turned into chaos. Somewhere to the west, she heard the cry of a horn. The soldiers were calling to regroup. It meant only one thing. They were preparing for another charge. The Apache lines were thin now, stretched too far. If the soldiers broke through, the camp would be lost. The chief turned toward her, shouting something she couldn't hear. Then a blast hit close, sending her sprawling to the ground. Her ears rang, the world spinning around her. When she lifted her head, everything was smoke and light. She saw him running toward her, hand reaching out as the soldiers advanced through the haze. The sound of rifles roared again. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder. She tried to stand, her legs trembling, her heart racing so fast it hurt. The last thing she saw was the chief raising his rifle, standing tall against the rush of men and fire, his voice carrying through the chaos, steady, unbroken, defiant to the end. And then the world went white with smoke and thunder, leaving everything hanging on the edge of silence. When the smoke began to clear, the silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfire. The ground was scattered with the marks of battle-broken weapons, overturned saddles, torn blankets. The air still smelled of gunpowder and dust. She lay motionless for a moment, her body aching, her heart thudding as she tried to catch her breath. The sound of the wind slowly returned, soft and low, brushing through the canyon like a whisper of life after chaos. She pushed herself up, her hands trembling. Her ears still rang, and her throat burned from the smoke. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Everything looked blurred, washed out by the sun breaking through the clouds. Then she remembered the chief, the soldiers, the camp. Her pulse quickened as fear pushed through the haze. She looked around, calling his name, her voice hoarse. There was no answer. Only the wind moved through the valley. She stumbled forward, her boots crunching over stones and ashes. The ridge where the battle had raged was quiet now, the gunfire gone. Here and there, a wounded man groaned, calling for water or help. The soldiers were gone, retreating to the far side of the valley. Their tracks were fresh in the dirt, heading east. She reached the place where she had last seen him. His horse lay still nearby, and her stomach twisted at the sight. She turned away, searching with growing panic. Then, near the rocks, where the ground dipped, she saw a movement of figure trying to rise. She ran to him, dropping to her knees beside him. His face was pale, streaked with dust, but when he looked at her, his eyes were still steady. "You should have stayed back," he said softly, a faint smile touching his lips. "I couldn't," she whispered. "I thought you were gone." He tried to sit, wincing as he held his arm. The wound on his shoulder was deep, but not deadly. She tore a strip from her dress and pressed it against the bleeding, her hands shaking. He didn't stop her. His gaze moved across the valley, where his people were beginning to gather the wounded. "They held the ridge," he said. "The soldiers won't return soon." They ran. "For now," his voice was quiet but sure, "they'll think we've lost too much to fight again." She looked at him, her throat tightening. "And have you?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes found the horizon where the first rays of sunlight touched the cliffs. "We lost many," he said finally, "but not all. As long as one heart beats for this land, we are not finished." His words stayed with her as she helped him stand. Together, they made their way back toward the camp. The scene there broke her heart family searching for loved ones. Men tending to the injured, women weeping quietly as they wrapped the fallen. Yet even through the sorrow, there was strength. The people moved with purpose, helping one another, rebuilding the fires that had gone out. Tala came running to her, her eyes red from tears. "You're alive," she cried, throwing her arms around her. Then she saw the chief, his arm bound, leaning against her for support. Her expression softened. And him too. He found a quiet place near the stream that ran through the valley, where the water still ran clear despite the dust. She helped wash the blood from his arm, careful not to let the wound reopen. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the camp filled the distant soft voices. The crackle of new fires, the slow return of life. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "The soldiers will come again someday," he said. "Maybe not soon, but they always do. When they come, we must be ready." "You'll be ready," she said, looking up at him. "You always are," he smiled faintly. "No one is ever ready. But we fight because we must, because this land is part of us." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "And now you are part of it too." Her chest tightened at his words. "I don't know where I belong anymore," she said honestly. "Not to their world, not fully to yours." "You belong where your heart stays," he said. "That is enough." The days that followed were quiet, but full. The tribe rebuilt what it could. Graves were marked with stones and feathers, and each evening fires were lit to honor the fallen. She worked beside Tala, helping to carry water and tend the wounded. Slowly, the camp began to look like home again. The children started to laugh once more, chasing each other through the tall grass near the stream. The men returned from hunting trips with food, and songs were sung again around the fire at night. Yet the scars of the battle remained, etched into every heart and every stretch of land. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the cliffs, she found the chief sitting alone near the ridge. The wind moved gently through his hair, carrying the smell of sage and smoke. She sat beside him without speaking for a long time. The view before them was endless, the desert glowing gold and red, the mountains in the distance fading into mist. "They'll write about this," she said quietly. "Maybe not our names, but the battle. They'll tell it their way." Nodded. "They always do." "I wish they could see it like this," she said. "Not just war and loss, but the people who lived here, who still live here." His gaze softened. "Then you must be the one to tell it right," he said. "Tell them we were more than what they saw from their saddles. Tell them we loved this land enough to die for it." Her throat ached, but she nodded. "I will." As night fell, the first stars appeared above them, scattered across the sky like silver dust. The wind carried the distant sound of drums from the camp, slow and steady, a heartbeat in the darkness. It was a sound that spoke of life continuing, even after everything had been lost. When she looked at him again, his eyes were closed, his face peaceful in the firelight. She realized that for all his strength, he was still just a man, tired, wounded, and human. The kind of man who carried the weight of his people on his shoulders and never once let it show. She reached for his hand, holding it gently. "Rest," she said. "You've done enough for now." He opened his eyes and looked at her, a small smile touching his lips. "For now," he agreed. "But not forever." The following morning came bright and clear. The storm clouds had gone, and the valley was quiet again. She watched the sun rise over the cliffs, the light spreading slowly across the land. For the first time in weeks, it felt like peace. The chief's men began to prepare for a journey north, to find new ground for the coming season. She knew she could go with them, or she could leave and try to find her way back to the world she came from. The thought of leaving filled her with an ache she didn't want to name. When she went to him to say goodbye, he looked at her with that same calm strength. "Wherever you go," he said, "the land will remember you. You came to us when your heart was lost. Now it knows the way." Tears stung her eyes. "I'll come back someday," he nodded. "Then I'll be here." She turned away, her heart heavy but full. As she walked across the valley, she felt the wind rise behind her, carrying the scent of sage and smoke, the whisper of voices long gone. She knew the world beyond would never understand what had happened here at the Courage. The loss, the quiet love that had grown out of hardship, but she would carry it with her, every step of her life. In time, stories would spread of an Apache chief who stood against the soldiers and lived, of a woman who fought beside a people not her own. Some would forget the truth. Others would pass it down in whispers. But she knew what really mattered wasn't how the story was told. It was that they had lived it, and somewhere, deep in the desert, where the canyon met the sky, the wind still carried their voices, soft and steady, echoing through the ages, a reminder that even in the harshest land, love and courage could take root and never fade.